as the city has changed, population-wise, you've had more people leaving Jackson. From 1980, according to the 1980 census, there were a little over 202,000 people living in Jackson. 1990, we went down to a little 196,000. 2000 went down to 184,000. Then 2010, it went down to 173,000. From 1980, the city of Jackson has lost about 29,000, almost 30,000 people from 1980 to now. And those folks have moved to surrounding communities.
Right, suburbs.
Byram, Clinton, Pearl, Grandin, Ridgeland, and Madison. All those folks who moved to those areas are not all white. A lot of whites have moved out, but also a lot of the black middle class. Homeowners have moved out. So we've been losing that tax base from not just the whites, but black middle class to the surrounding areas. And now for economic development, all of the recent shopping centers have been built in Madison, Ridgeland, Flowood, and now Pearl. So we don't have a tax base. So one of the things that we see the change is, politically, we've got more blacks elected to the city council and the mayor's office. Economically, there's been more of a drain of our tax base. And what we have to do is figure out how to stabilize the tax base. One of the things that during the recent poll, 41% of the voters of Jackson said the number one problem they have is they think it's crime. And it's not whether crime really exists, it's there's a perception that Jackson is a city with crime. That perception doesn't exist just within the city of Jackson. There are people who live in the surrounding areas, in Malik County, Tyler County, Holmes County, Copiah County, Warren County. Those folks used to come to Jackson to shop. Now they go to Rankin County or Madison County to shop. One of the reasons the store's located there, another reason is they're afraid to come here because of what perception of crime. So what we've done, I guess over the last 30, 40 years, has been to give blacks more of a political voice, but we have not stabilized the tax base and grew the city so that we can have more taxes coming in, because you can't take care of crime unless you have adequately trained, adequately paid police officers. In the city, you have, there's on the police department, a lot of officers who are not satisfied, a lot of senior officers who are retiring or leaving. Then you have other officers who, time to get the training in Jackson, they go to work for a surrounding community. Because they get paid more. The only reason they get paid more, those cities have a tax base which to raise the income in town.
So let's talk also about the police, but also what about quality of life issues that could, after school programs and things. Does a smaller tax base contribute to higher crime rates, in part because there not as many jobs and there are not a lot of other things to do, like for young people, and so is there a connection to that as well?
If you have a good substantial tax base, then the city could do more to improve the quality of life. Simple things: keeping the roads paved, streets and gutters clean, keeping trash picked up along the highway. You have things that could, the aesthetics that could affect people's attitude, as well as having substantial change like having more police presence. But it takes money to do any of those for the quality of life. After school programs for children, and not just after school programs, summer jobs. And that's something that you don't have to look to the government to provide. The city doesn't have to provide it. If you had an adequate economic base, if you had thriving businesses, they will more than likely hire students during the summer. And that helps with the child's self-esteem, and it also helps them to learn the value of money, the value of work, and other things. So without growing businesses in Jackson, you do affect the quality of life.
So, given your historical perspective, being that you were on the ground helping make the changes, and even what you just talked about, how do you imagine what happens Tuesday and days afterwards? What advice would you give to the voters who are, let's say, are still undecided or don't even want to vote because they become nauseated by all this sort of below the belt kind of stuff that's happening?
Often, and it's sad that it's not just voters in Jackson, but voters throughout this country generally vote for people that they like. Very seldom do we vote for policy choices as to which candidate do you think will have the best policy choice. Which candidate? Perceptions mean a lot too. If a business community have a perception that Jackson will not turn around after the election, business will leave. Talking about quality of life. You have a lot of people who go to work here in Jackson for the businesses that are still here. Some of them ride the bus. If businesses leave, move to Madison, Ridgeland, Brandon, Pearl, Flowood, folks will not be able to ride the bus. Those jobs are going to go. So you have to think about policy choices and perceptions. How will it affect your city thriving, surviving, or growing? Can your city afford to lose a substantial amount of business? If it does, how do you replace it? And if you replace it, what type of businesses do you replace it with? One of the things that I have felt uncomfortable with in the city of Jackson, and it's not to indict the former administration, but as businesses have left, there have been more check cashing businesses located in Jackson, and also more places where folks can buy alcohol.
Liquor store.
Liquor store. I don't want to. And those are fine businesses, but if that's what all you're attracting, then other businesses are going to look to see what is being replaced. I-55 North used to be thriving. Now it's mostly car lots that businesses have left. Highway 80. When Metro Center was over there, was a thriving corridor. It had businesses located all along Highway 80. They're almost all gone now. So you have to think about who's going to have the best chance at revitalizing those areas. And you have to stabilize the population drain. The reason I say the population drain is between 2000 and 2010, we lost 10,742 people to the city. Net loss. Between 1990 and 2000, we lost 12,319 people. Net loss. So, your population is being drained, and they're shopping. When they leave, they don't come back to Jackson to shop. So your tax base is going down, so it affects your quality of life. So you have to think about who's probably going to be in a better position to stabilize, to stop the bleeding of people and stop the bleeding of businesses out of the city. Because that tax base is what sustains the city.
We got about 5 minutes left, but one of the things that's become very clear in the latter days of this runoff is that it's got very racialized and very divisive in both camps. A lot of ad hominem and all that kind of stuff, which plays to either fears or concerns that people have. The stereotypical fear is that Lee is going to be holding the white people. The stereotypical fear about Lumumba is that he's going to be too scary, too black, and run people out. Speak a little bit to that and how that impacts the election, and whether or not you feel that those were necessary or important elements of the campaign.
In unfortunately, in every election, there's a negative campaign. That's become a way of life in this country. But there could be lasting effects from negative campaigning in a smaller area rather than a larger area. Negative campaigning goes on the presidential election, but it does adversely affect the country necessarily because of the negative campaigns, because you have a lot of businesses and industries throughout the country. And to get to a state like Mississippi, that's hard to attract business. Negative campaigning affects the state on the statewide level. Get to a smaller area, city of Jackson, that negative campaigning could lead to a continued drain of people and businesses from the city. So after the election, hopefully, there could be a healing in the city. But before the election, the perceptions are going to, and people are going to vote fears based on perception. And I wish instead of voting fears, they'd vote for the long-term best interest of the city. And who is likely to deliver that long-term best interest? One of the things I've heard about is, Jonathan received money from Republicans. Lumumba is too pro-black. And those type things are most divisive for a city, because once you run a city, it's like running a corporation. And you have to be able to try to attract something. When you're losing businesses and losing people, you have to go out of your way to try to attract. You can't be divisive. And so you have to restructure your image. Jonathan will have to restructure his image within the black community to show that he is a person looking out for the best interest of the city as a whole. Chuck Wade will have to do the same thing. He is looking out for the best interest of the city as a whole. Because we have whites who fear, and they have businesses in the city. And if they leave, the city is worse, because we're on the verge of, it could easily become like a Gary, Indiana, or Detroit, Michigan. And Detroit, businesses have fled, and the tax base is left, and now it's on the verge of bankruptcy. The state is going into receivership. And speaking of which, in the state of Michigan, the Republican-led legislature passed a law that allowed the state to take over any city that they felt had economic troubles. If you don't think that will happen in Mississippi, Mississippi has a Republican House of Representatives, Republican State Senate, Governor's Republican, Lieutenant Governor's Republican. If you don't think that they won't do that here in Mississippi, people need to wake up.
And so what do you mean by that? Do you mean that you need a person who can work with Republicans, or you feel like we need to be afraid of anybody who's opposed to Republicans?
You need a person who can work with Republicans, because Republicans are in charge. When Kirkson and I filed these lawsuits, it was Democrats in charge. And those Democrats were against black folks. They were all white Democrats. But we had to be able to communicate and stand and work with them. Now Republicans are in charge. One of the things people don't know, when we negotiated the state legislative reapportionment settlement in 1991, at that time we only had 20 blacks in the House and 2 in the Senate. We got over 40 in the House and 12 in the Senate. How did we get that? We negotiated that with Eddie Briggs, a Republican lieutenant governor. So you have to have people who can communicate with Republicans.
Okay. Well, we'll let that be the last word. We've got 0 minutes left. Dad, I really want to thank you for being on the show. One of the things I said is, as I've grown up a little older and sort of living in Jackson now, I really do think that the work that you and Parker and the late Senator Kirby did is so paramount. So many people don't know about it. We're going to be having a debate about 2 black people, who's black about it, who's not black about it, without the work y'all did to create the context where black folks can be elected. And so I want to salute you and the late Kirby and the late Edgar Evans, and so many people who gave of their time and talent and lives
Show. Remember, Tuesday, May 21st, go Rhodes.